No community college in America is going to move the needle very far on student learning until they take very seriously the role of assessment in teaching and learning. Now, assessment's an interesting word. It's been used a number of different ways, and it continues to be used a lot of different ways and creates confusion as a part of our sort of vocabulary of educationese. But we've been to this dance before unsuccessfully. When I was a young man in the 1980s, out of distrust of teachers, a movement started that was really a management by objective movement, writing behavioral objectives and measuring faculty in public schools in particular on their performance objectives for their students. Because it was based in distrust, it just didn't work. And it really just collapsed under its own weight in the late 1980s and failed to produce the reforms in learning that we had hoped they would produce. Then later in the 90s, out of distrust of institutions, because Lord knows what they're doing with all of our money, a similar movement came along, and it was assessment at the institutional level, the high school, the school district, the college, whatever. Similarly, built out of distrust, very expensive measurement tools and so on. It remains to be seen whether in the long term it achieves richer, deeper learning across the board for students or not. But neither of those really gets the point of assessment. Remember that the college is what the students experience. What do we want students to experience that assessment's important to? Well, it turns out that with adult learners, the most important and reinforcing experience in learning is knowledge of mastery. That is, I knew what I was supposed to learn, I learned it, and I know that I know it. And assessment's how that happens. This is how you partner with a learner, particularly an adult learner, who knows their own conditions of learning and can change them to support the conditions you're trying to produce as a faculty member. So here's what happens. First, you have to be able to name with great specificity what is it we expect you as the learner to be able to do, to know, to perform for us. Secondly, you have to be able to describe to the learner, here's how you will know that you've learned it. Because the most important user of student learning data is not the governor and not the legislature and not even the board of trustees and the president. The primary user of learning outcomes assessment is the learner. And when the learner gets that positive feedback loop going, they make rapid progress towards mastery. The literature, the research on this is deep and long and robust and undeniable. Now, there are 2 or 3 challenges to this. One is, if you start the assessment conversation with what the governor wants to know, or what the legislature wants to know, or what the State Board of Education wants to know, the faculty view the whole thing cynically and understand this isn't about learning, this is about somebody else's accountability agenda. And the faculty's focus is on student learning. So if you can protect the classroom environment from intrusion from the political forces that have legitimate interests in what we're doing, long enough to embed in the learning environment authentic assessment of student learning that the students use to guide their own learning and that faculty, their learning coaches, are able to use to guide them through the learning experience. Then assessment has immense leverage on student results. And if at a later date you want to summarize those data to policymakers and others, that's fine, but you have to start in the right place. So Valencia began some years ago with faculty leadership, helping all of our incoming faculty and existing faculty to wrestle with the question of assessment and understand that assessment is not something you add to teaching, it is at the very core of good teaching. To teach well is to first describe to the learner what knowledge they need to know, secondly, how you and they will know that they've learned it, and lastly, how to navigate the many resources for content that will equip a student to succeed in that assessment. So assessment, the purpose of assessment is to improve learning and not something else.